to bring forth our final guest of honor for the evening. He is a father, a 3-time TED Talk speaker, a doer, a dreamer, and a firm believer that the human heart has the power to transform galaxies. He provides language and strategies for multiple social ventures, with clients that include Revolve Impact, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, Stanford University, as well as first-time fathers like himself. With all my heart, I am truly honored to present to you Mark Gonzales.
Assalamu alaikum. When I was 14 years old, I was living in a little village in Alaska. And I always tell people it's proof Mexicans are everywhere. You can't escape us. And I remember in October, I was in 8th grade and I was sitting in English class, which was not my favorite class. And an ambulance went by. And an ambulance never goes by in a town of 400 people. And I don't know why, but I looked up at it and I knew something was wrong. And I just went back to work. And about 1 hour later, my father walks into work in his coveralls because he's a mechanic. My father had never shown up at school. And he started crying. And he's like, "Your mom is gone." And I still remember that moment over 25 years later. Partially because it dealt with a word that I did not yet understand, and that word is love. And we all learn love in different ways. We learn love from family, we learn love from partners, but we especially learn love when we lose it. And it began a journey in my life of really trying to find the answer to this question: what is love? We live in a time where 500 million tweets are sent out every day on Twitter, each of which has 144 characters, which means over 50 billion characters are sent out in the digital sphere every day. Yet if you get any room together and ask them to just define those 4 characters, love, you normally end up with blank faces. We use words, but we don't sit down and ask what they really mean to us. And I've traveled a lot on this world. And each country and continent I sat on, I was trying to figure out what love meant. And for me, it's been a constantly growing definition. And one of the definitions I love most is this: my family. My wife, Soraya, my daughter, Sarat, are teaching me a definition of love that I did not yet know, no matter how much I'd given my heart. And especially how many people in the audience are parents. How many people in the audience would like to be parents one day? Some of you are like, never. I took care of my little siblings. You can never force that upon me. When you watch a child come into this earth, the ironic thing when you're sitting there holding them and you're like, they're so beautiful, and you're like, they're smiling at me, they can't see you. That's all in your mind. The reality is you're still a blur because the brain hasn't figured out that this is a face yet. It only knows sounds and maybe some colors. It's not about until about 1 month, 2 months in that pixelation begins to take form, and then you see that moment when you're looking at a child and they're like, "Oh, you again." And then they blink and then they look up and they're like, "Oh, you again." And part of the reason they have that look is because memory also hasn't formed. They sit there, they look at their hand, it disappears, it comes back, they're like, "Whoa, Where'd that come from again? Same thing with their feet, which they put in their mouth. And then they put it down, and then they put it in their mouth again. Why? Because they're seeing if it will feed them. They try it over and over because the brain has not yet learned that, oh, this isn't going to give you any milk. Sorry, no matter how much you try. And so this is how much the brain has to learn things. And when I look at my daughter, I'm really fascinated by that because I realize everything she learns is going to be everything she learns. There's no pre-programming. Every generation has a new normal. And as I think about that, and I think about my journey in life, and my journey of love, both for better or for worse, and I sit here looking at this little child, and I'm wondering, how are you going to learn love versus how I learned love? And I think about the world we live in. And I think about all the things I want to tell her as she grows up. And the first things I want to tell her is about what love is not. We live in a time where there are more refugees on the planet than any other time in human existence, 51.2 million refugees on the planet, even though we have the least amount of wars than any time in human history. Ironic, these scales here. And the mind has this amazing kind of phenomenon that happens, that the more it sees something, the more it normalizes it. So when we begin to grow up and we see so many refugees, we begin to think that this is the way the world always has been. And when we believe that it's the way the world always has been, we believe it's the way the world always will be, and we never try to transform it because that's just the way it is. And so for my little daughter, I want to sit here and I want to be like, no matter what you see in the world, no matter how many people you see forced out of their homelands, no, love is not displacement. And I also want to tell her about love and the person she chooses to carry her love with is not binary. The #1 injury to women between the ages of 15 and 44 in the United States is people who claim to love them. More than any other factor, more than any other sector, people who claim to love women are the #1 source of their injury. And as Louis C.K. points out, comedian, the #1 source of men's injury is our own heart. Saying like, we can't do it anymore, I quit. You know, and I want to tell her that as she grows up and she looks at this world and she sees, again, people harming one another and people who claim to love one another abusing one another, to tell her this is not normal and this is not love. And the same thing as she grows up and she looks at the people around who are supposed to protect her. And we begin to look at police violence in the United States, 3,666 shootings in the last 6 years, compared to Australia, which had 15. And Germany, which had 13. And the UK, which had 7. And Iceland, which had 1. To be like that is not normal. And that is not love. And to also teach her that love is not silent. That no matter how often some crazy bigot gets on television and begins speaking ramblings about how this country is being invaded, how there's anchor babies or terrorist baby cells, that love does not remain quiet in the face of that. And it's not just the bigots that do not look like us. It's also teaching her that the bigots who do look like us also need to be spoken against. And to not just speak against, but to speak for and speak up and speak out. And that is what love is. And love is not selfish. Because despite what Donald Trump says about so many people coming into this country, the #1 host of refugees on the world is Pakistan. #2 is Iran. The US holds 10% of the amount of refugees that either of those countries hold. And I think about that. And I think about that as a nation that has so much resources and so much love and so much to give. How selfish we've become with what we are able to actually do. But I also, as I raise my daughter, do not want to tell her all the things that love is not and then leave her empty with what love is. And I want to remind her that love is bold and love is courageous. And most of all, from all the things I heard tonight, whether you're talking about entrepreneurship, whether you're talking about tech, whether you're talking about social innovation, all of those are rooted in two things: a love for a people and imagination. Because love is first and foremost imaginative. For example, Mark Bustos, a barber, charges probably $50 to $80, like for an average haircut. Amazing stylist. Spends one day of the week going down into skid rows of different cities and giving the homeless a haircut because of the dignity that a person feels when they're cleaned up, because of something that they can no longer afford. And it also reveals something about us when we see people transformed, about the ways how closed our own hearts have become. Or to think about Pedro Reyes, Mexico, in the midst of an amazing cartel war, and so many guns and so many murders over the last 5 years, was given a whole bunch of guns by the Mexican military and asked what he wanted to do with it, because he was a steel maker. And he decided to melt down all the guns and start making instruments out of them, because he felt it would be amazing to turn instruments of violence into instruments of beauty. Humans of New York, how many of you follow them on Instagram? Amazing photojournalism blog of just trying to capture the story of a city that went global 2-3 years ago, not just of New York, but of the blogger being invited into different countries. Humans of Iran is going on right now. Humans of Pakistan just happened about 3 months ago. And he did a special focus on human bondage and trafficking coming out of the wars in Pakistan at the moment. And he just did a few posts on a specific community saying, we want to do a crowdsourcing fund in order to help people get out of human bondage. And within a short span of time, $2 million were raised in under 30 days, given entirely to the community. And these are the types of things I want to teach my daughter, and these are the types of things I want to remind myself, and these are the types of things I want to offer you to remind us to love one another and to be imaginative in the ways we love. Because the truth is, we were born in love. No matter if we're looking from an Islamic theology perspective or we're looking from a tribal perspective, we all have a creation story. And we know that the creation, the origin, all begins in love. And then in our specific tradition, we know our destination, al-wadud, is also in love. So if we are born in love and we return to love, then what is our purpose in this life? But to be a bridge between love. And that is why, after going to 15 countries in the last 4 years and sitting with people and holding listening parties around how do you love? What are the gifts you give to people? What would you want in this moment? And having colleagues who did the same Rid's design of Islamic Relief, these are his photos from Islamic Relief USA, going to Somalia, Syria, Egypt, Bosnia, we have all these titles we give to countries. And we forget that at the end of the day, while we may see Somalia, and we may see Egypt, and we may see Syria, and we may see Bosnia, when you're in this space, people see two things: family and love. family, 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 and love. And I think about my daughter, Sirat, our bridge. The bridge from before and the bridge to the after. And I think about us. And I think I have two choices as a parent. If I want to love her and keep her safe, like every parent wants to do, and I look out at the world around me, I can do one of two things. I can lock her in a closet and be like, you're never leaving the house until you're 21, which is damaging. Because human beings are first and foremost social creatures. When you look at the neuroscience studies of what happens in isolation to the human brain, is that the hand and the wall begin to dissipate. And over the span of 2 days, when you're kept in a cage and not surrounded by anyone, you literally cannot see the difference between this, and the brain eats itself. It's torture to keep our children isolated, even if that's what we want to do, thinking we're going to love them. So if I know that, then what is my only option left as a father? It's to make the world as safe as possible. And that is what each and every one of us do. We love. We have all these fancy words for our sectors. We have all these fancy words for social innovation and social good. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how do you love and how big is your heart? And so I just invite you to think of that and to think what is preventing you from loving fully yourself. What is preventing you from loving fully your family and those who raised you? And what is preventing you from loving fully each other? Because at the end of the day, we all come from love. And we all return to love. And so what is love? It's inevitable. Al-hub, a noun, not just a verb. What we always will be and what we always hold. May we love one another.